At the most inconvenient time imaginable, the government ordered Joseph and his then pregnant wife Mary to make the 8 or 9 day journey to Bethlehem. Caesar Augustus, the Roman emperor, required every man to return to his hometown with his family to register for a census. We read that in Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Scripture lays out the timeline for us. When Mary learned of her own pregnancy, her relative Elizabeth was already 6 months along in her pregnancy. We read that in Luke chapter 1, verse 39. Scripture tells us that Mary rushed to visit Elizabeth, but even rushing would still take 8 or 9 days of travel. And Mary stayed with Elizabeth for 3 months. We read that in the first chapter of Luke at verse 56. So by the time that Mary returned to her hometown of Nazareth, she likely would have been somewhere in the midterm of her pregnancy. Adam Hamilton suggests that once she returned to Nazareth, Mary and her fiancé Joseph got together, they planned the wedding, they followed through and actually got married. They remained in Nazareth probably as an accommodation to Mary, who by then was nearly full term in her pregnancy. The trip back to Bethlehem would be difficult and probably even dangerous for Mary at that stage of her pregnancy. Then, as if these two did not already have problems enough, a Roman soldier delivered the bad news that they were commanded to go immediately to Joseph's hometown in order to be registered for the Roman census. The world authorities, under Satan's domination, we read that in 1 John 5:8, were imposing a painful and arduous journey, one that would be difficult and dangerous for Mary. Moreover, the journey would remove Mary from familiar surroundings and friends at a critical time in her pregnancy. Little did Mary know at the time, this was only the beginning of a long and painful journey, a journey that would end at the cruel Roman cross. Satan takes great glee in dishing out pain and inconvenience during the life journey of every soul on earth. But God often uses Satan's very misdeeds to accomplish God's perfect purpose. The trek to Bethlehem, for example, resulted in fulfillment of that ancient prophecy, the prophecy that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. That's Micah 5:2. There were very few choices of roads for Mary and Joseph to take as they made their way from Bethlehem to Nazareth, and no one knows for sure which road they took, but the shortest one, and therefore the one that would be most likely for them to have taken, was the road that went through the very same territory that had been traveled on by Abraham and then years later by Jacob. On their journey to Bethlehem, Mary and Joseph likely would have traveled through Bethel, where Jacob had observed angels traveling back and forth between heaven and earth. While observing this heavenly portal, Jacob received the same blessing that his grandfather Abraham had received, a blessing that promised, among other things, that an offspring from Jacob's lineage would bless all peoples of the earth. We read that in Genesis 28, verse 14. That blessing, of course, would come through the Messiah, Jesus. Later, after Jacob confronted his past transgressions by restoring to his brother Esau the blessings of wealth and power that he had stolen years before, Jacob returned to Bethel. This time at Bethel, God changed Jacob's name to Israel, meaning one who struggles with God. Genesis 35:10. Life is filled with struggles, but we walk through those struggles with God. Then we become changed as a person when we acknowledge God is sovereign over our life. But for me, the most dramatic steps in Mary and Joseph's journey to Bethlehem would have been when they passed by the Herodium. Herod's fortified summer palace was called the Herodium, and it was located on the outskirts of Bethlehem. Herod the Great had been appointed as king of Judah by the occupying Roman government. The Roman Senate had even dubbed Herod King of the Jews. Herod was powerful, and he suffered delusions of paranoia. He killed his wife and several of his children, for example, because he feared that they were trying to steal his kingdom. As Mary and Joseph passed Herod's summer palace, they were walking in the shadow of death. After the wise men had inquired about the newborn king of the Jews, Herod hatched a plot to kill all the male infants in the Bethlehem area. We read that in the 2nd chapter of Matthew. God's messenger angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and alerted Joseph to Herod's plot. And that was when Mary and Joseph made their way to Egypt, so that the prophecy in Hosea 11:1 would be realized, that out of Egypt the Messiah was called. At every turn of their journey, Satan threw up roadblocks, but God used them for his good plan. The prophet Isaiah referred to Christ as the Prince of Peace. That's Isaiah 9:8. We recognize that when Christ returns and defeats the forces of evil, he will reign for the millennium of peace. That's Revelation 20, verse 6. But what about now? When Jesus reigns in our hearts and in our souls, we become a new person. That's 2 Corinthians 5:17. Then we can have that peace, even in the midst of turmoil, a peace that defies worldly logic, Philippians 4:7. As his life was about to end, Jesus promised, "In me you will have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, because I have overcome the world." That's John 16:33. The peace of Christ enters our lives when, on life's journey, even when we're walking in the shadow of death and difficulties, if we know that God is with us. God can use even the worst of life's calamities to accomplish his plan. So this Christmas, let's reflect on the journey we are taking in this life. Consider with me, if you will, these questions. Question number 1. What difficulties are you encountering on life's journey? Jesus said that there would be tribulations in this world. Question number 2. As you walk through the shadows of death and difficulties, how are you connecting with the Prince of Peace? And then question number 3, how is God using the tribulations of this world to accomplish his plan for your life? When Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem, there was no guest room available for them. We read about that in Luke chapter 2, verse 7. They were relegated to the stable, but even that was used for God's glory. The shepherds in nearby grazing fields were able to visit the infant king lying in a manger as the angels overhead sang, "Peace to those on whom his favor rests." That's Luke 2, verse 14. May you find the peace of Christ this Christmas. So kind of walk in and, whoop, there's the... Satan takes great glee in dishing out pain and inconvenience during the life journey of every soul on earth. You've got that thing racing. Very few choices of roads for Mary and Joseph. Can we take this over? No, it's fine, but I remained troubled by having said the trek from Bethlehem. It's to Bethlehem.
It's so cold, the screen hasn't rested.
Oh dear.